Okay, we're live. Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to macOS 10.15, the future of Mac administration and more. Ask me anything, or in this case, ask us anything. One of the first comments in the Slack channel for this was, I don't know if these people are brave or idiots. And the answer is yes. Without further ado, let's have everybody introduce who they are. As soon as the... Go ahead, Lisa?
I'm Lisa. I've been working with Macs for quite a long time. I'm moving my career into InfoSec, so if I'm successful at that, I won't see you next year, but otherwise, I look forward to having a beer with you next year.
Hey, I'm Alan. I work at NASA at Glenn Research Center in Cleveland, Ohio. I've been doing Macs since 2001 or so. I've been admin. Yeah.
I'm Robert Hammen. I've been working with Mac since before OS 10, which really shows how old I am. But I currently work at NIH in suburban Washington, D.C. area, managing the Mac environment.
My name is Rich Trouton. I work for a small boutique software company called SAP. And I run a blog. I hear people read it.
Good morning, I'm Jennifer. I work for a bank. It's kind of small, like Rich's company. And this is my emotional support Yoshi. So he's here to keep all of us from being stressed.
Hi, I'm Amanda. I work at Lower Merion School District. I've been there about 17 years now. It's right outside Philadelphia. And yeah, we manage Macs, iPads, PCs, Chromebooks.
All right, so much for the introduction. So we're going to do questions. If people are in the overflow room, they can submit questions via the Slack channel. We have someone monitoring it here. So without further ado, we will open up the floor. Who's going to go first?
It's going to be a short session.
Come on, it doesn't hurt.
Okay.
All right, here we go.
Thank you.
Hello? Hi, so I'm in the Appleseed Enterprise testing program like a lot of people here. And I've heard several different Apple SEs, and yeah, SEs, talk about these mythical test plans. Can any of you speak to that?
I believe they're coming soon. I mean, I'm in Appleseed for IT, and they will be there. Previous years, they've always shown up under your account. They show up in the application, the feedback assistant. If you're not signed up for Appleseed for IT, I recommend you do so. It's no longer invitation only, so all you need to do is, if you have Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager, you create a managed Apple ID with that, and then you can log in. But they will be there, rest assured.
Yeah, and Apple has had some events that were invitation only in some of their locations where they've invited people and they've actually had the test plans there for specific technologies. So I know they're there, they're just in the process of being refined. You know, it's sort of like, I was talking to a developer about some documentation. He's like, yeah, I really want to adopt that, but the documentation doesn't exist, and it's been a month since WWDC, so. Okay, who wants to go next?
I have an answer.
Speaking of Apple School Manager, I work for our university where we also have a medical center attached to us. And it's always kind of hard to find out who actually owns our Apple School Manager account and the hierarchy. I'm looking at trying to get it for the university, and if we don't have ownership of it, I'm wondering if there's like a parent-child type relationship that anybody is aware of. Every time I ask about it, we're very segregated right now, so.
Okay, so I can probably speak to this best from anybody, I think. At NIH, there's 27 different institutes, and there's about 10 or 12 different Apple School Manager instances, which has led to some really interesting challenges. There's a number of institutes that share a pool of, there's a number of people that share a pool, and we sort of on the honor system, you don't assign somebody else's IPs, but then there are people who have their own ASM instances, which has led to some real fun, like ordering machines from the Apple online store and having them auto-assigned to somebody else's MDM. Before I even moved them into pre-stage, I powered a machine on and it offered to enroll in somebody else's MDM. That was fun to try to get fixed. So that's one of those, talk to your SE, try to figure out the best practices. In your case, given that if you're a very distributed organization, you probably want to have multiple, especially if you don't have to worry about moving machines from part of your organization to another part, because that's something that also, it doesn't work very well with Apple School Manager. We've got some other professional colleagues that work for a media company that purchased another media company, and they've been trying to logistically deal with how do we integrate two different Apple Business Managers, and how do I get all these machines from two disparate systems into a single MDM, and that's an area that Apple falls down on big time right now. So, all right, we have more questions. I'm going to go right over here.
Just to continue with the separate Apple School Managers, have you ever been able to transfer those from one Apple School Manager to the other one? Have you? Because we have that scenario right now where one IT department has some of our computers in their Apple School Manager, want to bring them over to ours, and we've called and they said that they couldn't do it. But last time I was talking to the Apple guy here, he said that you can do it. So have you ever been able to?
I heard him say the same thing. I wasn't able to get it happen a few weeks ago, so.
Yeah. Okay.
Talk to your Apple rep.
Yeah.
Give him the name of the rep you talked to here, Steve. Yeah. Steve. Yeah. Tell them to email each other. Yeah. We'll get it figured out.
I can also sort of address that because within my own company, we have a special division that is kind of firewalled off from the rest of the company because they deal with government customers who, of course, they have their own special security requirements. So we basically just took a division and lopped them off as much as possible, except that our purchasing is still joint. So they have their own Apple Business Manager set up. They have their own MDM. But we were finding that their stuff was winding up in our ABM. So we're still working with Apple to get that separated out. However, one thing we got told at one point was, and I'm going to state in advance, this is the wrong advice, do not do this. What we were told is, go ahead, identify the machines you want, and get them revoked out of your pool. Don't do that. This is the process formerly known as disowning. I'm not sure what the current thing is, but don't do that because it is going to be real hard to get them back in. So just in case anyone ever gets advice from a reseller or maybe even from an Apple SE saying, oh yeah, just disown them and it'll be fine. It will not be fine. Do not do that. The answer there is the reseller needs to pull them back out, then work with Apple to get them assigned to the new ABM instance.
I'll second that. That's bad advice, and it's what I was given and what ultimately ended up having to do because I needed to deploy the systems.
So does there end up being like a grace period?
The question is if there's a grace period. Well, again, the resellers have the ability to, like you said, to pull them back and push and then assign them. In this case, the reseller was Apple, but just trying to get the right people to do that sometimes is a challenge. Okay, question.
Can you just run through the normal Apple return process and have them send you new machines?
Maybe we could have, but have you had any experience with that, Rich? No. The problem I had was that I was trying to replace machines that were under the repair extension program, the non-touch bar machines with the SSD problems. And so I was kind of like trying to get these machines swapped out before we had a drive failure, so I was a bit under the gun time-wise. So if I have two machines I can't manage an MDM, it's not the end of the world. They're not T2s. So, okay.
I asked this question in previous talk. I'm going to ask it again. It's regarding to testing on betas and software on betas for any organization. What framework, if any framework, exists for testing the actual applications? Doesn't matter what it is on your new OS, so I don't have to sit there and actually like type and click and do things of that sort.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, are you talking about like an automation that's gonna run your applications for you and see if they function?
Correct. So open and close isn't what I'm looking for. That anyone can do. It's like actually using the app and seeing if they work and break.
Personally, I put the beta on my machine and use it every day and then see what happens. While I also have this lovely machine right here that works perfectly and has a backup copy of everything I own. I'm not aware of anything that's really going to be able to predict daily usage. I don't know if anyone else up here is. I mean, there's some testing software for looking for code bugs and things like that, but if it's every application that you're going to use during the day, I don't think you're going to be able to get a better result than just trying to use it.
Yeah, you're never going to get anything that accounts for human error. You can use something like Eggplant, but you have to actually create the steps for it to do to make sure that it doesn't fail. I mean, you can try that. We've done that in the past, but outside of that, there's not much.
The best testing my shop has found is identify folks who are, they want to test new stuff and put that to your advantage. Make sure that they know that this is beta software stuff is going to go wrong, and ask them to help you get to a place where you feel confident rolling out the new OS, which means they'll be able to get it that much sooner. Because as my previous panelists have mentioned, there is no substitute for finding human errors than humans. So that would be my best advice. Put your best humans on it and let them test.
Okay. Questions? Do we have any from this?
I have one from the channel. What would be the best practice for companies with 2 physical offices in different countries? Should you still segment your Apple Business Manager mobile device management?
I'd personally try to keep it together. You've probably got a global asset management team that, if you are large enough to have offices in different countries that are managing your purchases and your assets, separating it out is going to complicate life for you. There's probably workflow exceptions, such as when you've acquired companies, mergers, divestitures, acquisitions, where all of this gets messy. And those are usually the exceptions to the rule, where sometimes you do end up deleting devices from ABM, particularly if you're partway through a divestiture. You don't want that divested company re-enrolling into your current environment.
Okay, questions?
You had spoke yesterday about, especially with obviously Catalina, I think it's probably going to happen more, but the macOS and BridgeOS becoming kind of out of sync, if you would, and potentially breaking the machine. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit more.
Talk about the BridgeOS?
Yes.
Who here installed Beta 3 of Catalina on a T2 machine? Anyone on the day that it was released? Did you?
I did. It started, I left work, I came back to work the next day, and it failed.
You were able to get it back though?
Yeah.
Okay, because I had a colleague who was not even able to use the beta configurator to get it reloaded, and he had to get the machine in for service. So I don't know if it was human error, automation error, or just stuff not replicating to the, because Apple uses content distribution networks like Akamai, But for some reason, with the beta version of the OS that came out, beta 3, the beta version of Bridge OS wasn't published. This was bad. There was a, because the Bridge OS and macOS communicate via XPC. So they're kind of dependent upon having compatible versions, and when it wasn't able to update Bridge OS, it definitely caused problems for a few people. Thankfully, it was beta. It wasn't a production release. That would have been much worse. Anybody get their watch bricked by, was it like 5.1? One of the Watch OS updates had a problem that was breaking watches. So I think it's good that it happened in the beta cycle, because maybe it will not happen in a release cycle. Some lessons were learned, shall we say. But all right. Questions? Do we have a-
I got it. Question from Slack. It seems like an eventuality that Apple will go to ARM processors. How do you see that affecting Mac admins? In other words, where are the speed bumps?
I've been doing this a while, and I've gone from 68K to PowerPC, then PowerPC to Intel. And Apple handled it. I mean, I did not experience many roadblocks along the way. I can't think of anything that was specific to the processor, aside from, of course, when you switch to Intel, for example, I lost Classic. So you may lose some functionality that is dependent on that processor, but by and large, as long as your software follows Apple's guidelines for development, the APIs that software should be talking to should in turn be talking to Apple's, Apple's frameworks for handling those situations for the software. So basically, as long as the developer is doing their job right, I do not imagine that there should be roadblocks.
The next question we have is imaging dead? The answer is yes. If you're confused, there is a website, isimagingdead.com. I have some slides from my presentation on Tuesday that will definitively prove that imaging blows up with some lovely keynote effects and is replaced by something called provisioning, or MDM, or device enrollment, or literally anything else. That's all I have for Slack right now.
Okay. Want to look up some of our online questions?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So, any other questions here? Go ahead.
Okay, so since imaging is dead, talk about your preferred method for not imaging. What things do you all recommend and use?
So restoring a system to its default state, if you have DEP or user device enrollment, or
UAMDM.
or user.
Device enrollment. Sorry.
It's true. They've changed everything. So you used to have DEP and VPP. Now you have user approved. And but yeah, I would set it back to its original state. Either do user initiated enrollment, which gets you the UAMDM, which you're going to need if you want to push certain profiles to your system. But the way that Apple's going, you really want to get your computers into Apple Business Manager, Apple School Manager, because you're going to want to have your system supervised. So what was known previously for being DEP, if they are enrolled in ABM or ASM and then assigned to an MDM, you can then have them be supervised, and that's really the state you want to do. And then once they are that, you can use your tool of choice. There's DEP Notify to get that system back into state, which is a really great tool for first-time enrollments and getting the machine up to date.
So we're a K-12 with a couple thousand Macs, and because Apple software updates still take over 40 minutes to install, especially on our older hardware, we still do a wipe and reload every summer. which is, it's a big task for us. It takes the whole summer pretty much. So we looked at all the tools, and there's a couple options. You can use Tim's Mac deploy stick. It's great. We tried that. And then Apple also has a Mac provisioner tool, which does something similar, a wipe and refresh. If you're an education customer, you can reach out to your SE and see if it's available to you. I don't believe if you're not EDU, you can get it, but you could ask, I guess. But yeah, after that, we have MDM, DEP takes over, DEP notify. It works great. It's slower than imaging, but we're able to get 6,500 machines done in less than 8 weeks. So depending on your staff, there's options there, and hopefully keep bugging your SEs and praying that they can get that update install time down, that we don't have to do this wipe and refresh every summer. Nobody wants to do it.
Cache the installers on the system so they're there for when you need them, and then you can use your tool of choice to trigger an erase install or a reinstall, whatever you need to do. Have your device enrollment provisioning process take 5 to 10 minutes. So that way the whole process is going to be about as quick as it can be. You're not walking around with USB sticks or sending teams out. You can do it all remotely.
There's a few deployment scenarios that you may need to consider in your own environments. Probably the easiest is going to be DEP and then letting your MDM install software to set up your machines. Because in that case, you can set it up to be a pretty hands-off experience that your users can run themselves. But there's also going to be scenarios like, for example, folks who need to rapidly set up and turn around like a set of training laptops for classes. In that case, that's where solutions like MDS, Mac Deploy Stick, or Greg Nagel's Bootstrapper, or other similar tools shine, because then you have those installers cached on local storage or on a local web server. You can pull, boot to recovery, run the necessary commands, get those machines re-provisioned, and that works with or without an MDM. So, I mean, in my own case, I do a lot of provisioning of VMs. I don't have those VMs enrolled in an MDM for my own use. So I'm using Bootstrapper to attach a second virtual machine disk to my VM. I boot to recovery, I run Bootstrapper, and it installs a bunch of packages onto the VM to configure it. I mean, that's, it's simple, but it works. And I wind up with a fully configured VM at the end, and I didn't have DEP involved, I didn't have an MDM server involved, and I still have configured VMs. So there's still lots of ways to do this, but I think the main thing is focus on not imaging, because it is pretty dead, but focus on how do I set up an unconfigured factory fresh OS. And if you have a workflow that uses packages and scripts to do that, you should be in good shape.
I'm going to add one more thing to this. There's two issues with machines. There's provisioning a machine and then probably re-provisioning a machine. Apple's messaging on this is kind of not clear. What they've referred to as device enrollment, DEP in the past, they're changing all the terminology. There's really two ways to get a system into an MDM. There's the what is now more like automated device enrollment or just device enrollment, where your serial numbers are in Apple School Manager or Apple Business Manager. You assign them to an MDM, you power that machine on, and you get the DEP nag, or what it was known as, or the alert saying, so-and-so wants to manage this Mac, configure this Mac. That's the automated device enrollment. Then there's you provision the Mac or set it up, and then you enroll it in your MDM, and you have to go in to System Preferences Profiles and manually approve the MDM profile. That's for the manual device enrollment. There is an important difference between those two types of enrollment, because particularly with macOS Catalina, because there's a lot of functionality that you do not get if your systems were set up the manual method. You don't get things like bootstrap tokens, activation lock escrow. You don't get supervision in Catalina. So this is an area that I encourage you to provide feedback to your Apple reps, because I know in my own personal situation, I don't have a ton of machines in Apple Business Manager. So virtually my entire fleet is enrolled in the manual method. So basically, if I want to get them to Catalina and supervised, what am I going to have to do? Get them into Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager and wipe and reprovision them, which is the other topic that I want to talk about. That's, I think when Mike Boylan from Apple was talking here, he talked about rapid return to service, and that's the way of how do we get a machine back to a known good state with a good OS. So how do you do that in iOS? Settings, general, reset, erase all content and settings, right? How many would like if you could do that on macOS? Yeah. What does Catalina do? We have a read-only system volume. So if I erase a Catalina machine, does that leave my user data? No, it still nukes that today. I don't think that's going to change in Catalina, but we could be having some interesting discussions about this next year. And to that end, that might address Amanda's issue. If we could get, that OS partition is read-only. Do we need to install it or can we copy it? Because I can upgrade an iOS device by plugging it in and applying an IPSW file to it. Could we do the same thing with macOS? We can already hook Macs up to configurator. So, I think the biggest takeaway from this all, especially with Catalina, is work with your Apple rep and your resellers to get all of your machines into Apple Business Manager or Apple School Manager, because that's clearly the avenue they're pushing us to do. Just like they pushed us to use MDM and said that imaging is dead, they're now saying go this route.
For an automated enrollment scenario, how do you all choose between installing packages in the automated phase versus installing packages in the MDM phase versus installing packages downstream with some other mechanism?
I choose where to install the packages based on their priority. So if it's something that needs to be on the machine for me to be able to deliver the machine to a user, so if it's a requirement from our security policies or just a requirement for functioning with our systems, maybe it's even like a VPN app that you really don't want anyone to walk away without. Those come down first and get set up as part of the initial setup. And you can choose to do that with MDM, or you choose to do that with something like your DEP Notify or Splash Buddy or some other setup that's going to do it as part of that provisioning process. Other things that maybe some of your users will use and some of them won't, or they're really big, like Xcode, for example. I've chosen to provide those to users in another way. So a separate download that they can trigger when they want to, or like self-service if you have Jamf, so that they have a computer that is ready to be used as quickly as possible, that will function for the majority of their needs and function all of our requirements. And then as they get into more complicated tasks and more complicated work that requires extra applications and services, they can take the time to download those. But I don't really want anyone to be handed a new computer and then sit there for an hour or two watching it download things.
Yeah, our workflow is pretty similar. We do DEP notify. It prompts the technician actually for the computer name, and then based on the computer name, MDM pushes the packages that computer needs. We install as few packages as possible for like high school students, and they can use self-service as teachers as well. But for our middle schools and elementary schools, they're still getting a lot of software that needs to be there. We don't give them self-service because they don't want to waste classroom time downloading packages, so they still get a lot of packages. But it's not done during the provisioning step. It's done during, once that DEP notify gets that computer name, it does an inventory check and pulls down the packages that that computer actually needs.
We use Macs in our staff and faculty training center that run boot camp and Windows 10 on them. Do you foresee any problems with running 32-bit applications in Windows 10 and boot camp under Catalina? Or has anybody tried in testing that?
So to clarify, you're asking if you're going to have problems running 32-bit Windows applications on Catalina?
Or in a Windows partition boot camp.
I see that as being determined by what Windows allows, not what Catalina allows. No, I mean, under the hood, it's running an Intel processor that will support whatever that processor supports. So for Windows, I think you're going to be dealing more with Windows limitations than anything else. So if your Windows OS allows 32-bit apps to run, then I don't see an issue. I don't see where Catalina's it gets involved at that point.
There was also a similar question about boot camp in the channel that was kindly answered by someone else while we've been talking, but I did just want to share it because it's related. And that is confirmation that boot camp is available for Catalina, and that Microsoft Windows 10 does run on ARM. So if there is a future in which Apple is switching to ARM processors, there's no need at the moment to be concerned that you won't continue to have this feature.
Going back to your testing, getting somebody, trusted to help you test Catalina, do any of you have a preferred tool, framework, spreadsheet, anything that you use to document what you're testing, the results are, especially if you have, let's say, a trusted person who's helping, you want to get consistent feedback so you can see what's going on. Do you have anything you recommend for that kind of thing?
I build out lists of spreadsheets of required, what I call test matrices. That'll be internal services, applications that different groups and the company needs to operate, any in-house applications, and validate that those work. I have subject matter experts within the company also test. I can test some of the basic functionality. Does it open and close? Can I log into the website? But driving some of those tools, I need the actual expert to make sure that those still work. I usually bring those people in when I'm comfortable that Catalina is, or whichever OS it is working okay on a test device, to test those workflows that I don't have the skills to evaluate, and then mark them off as done and rinse and repeat as we get closer and we have the gold master.
I've got one other person first. I'll get you.
It's not very sophisticated, but I also just use a chat room for all of my testers are invited into that room so that they can talk to one another about what they're experiencing, because some of them obviously are going to be using systems that I don't. And then I can freely speak with them as well and try and work through any issues. And it's in a text form, so it's all saved, and we can all go back and take a look at it later if we need to track back something that happened, or if someone said, I think Bob mentioned that, his Safari was quitting. I can go back and look and see what steps he took and then move on. It's not an automated system or anything, but it does work fairly well.
We're an Atlassian shop, and so we use Jira and Confluence, so a lot of things are done in Confluence, and then Jira tickets are created when issues are found and things like that. So.
Robert had mentioned getting all your machines into either AVM or ASM. We have some machines like we bought through our Bookstore, and they weren't like an Apple authorized shop to be able to allow us to put those machines then into DEP, and I'd say we've probably got 1,000 of those. But I mean, they're within the window of being able to be within DEP. Does anybody run into that? Is that something that Apple could go back if we send them a list, or are we just screwed and can't do anything with it? So.
Unfortunately, you cannot bring back machines that were not purchased from a vendor that is a DEP reseller, as far as I know. And there's still not a provisional DEP like iOS, so, and I honestly don't see that coming to anything that's not a T2, but obviously I can't say either way.
I provide that feedback to your Apple rep. That's one thing I think Apple could do a little bit more, is try to help their customers get stuff into DEP. Maybe not do it, but work with them and at least identify, you bought these machines from this reseller. Hey, reseller, can you put these machines into this person's, kind of pull the strings a little more to try to motivate this.
So this question is for all of you. And it piggybacks on a lot of the other questions that people have been asking related to testing and your testing methodologies. I work in an environment where we have 2 platforms that we support, and I'm sure that a lot of people here, we always get that, oh, we want a single pane of glass. We want one tool to rule everything. Well, so my question to you guys is there any partnering on, and if there is partnering, what does that look like with your Windows counterparts or other platform counterparts in your different scenarios as far as testing, QA, etc. Because I think it feels like we're trying to do something that there's already a process for on the other side of the fence, and I'd like to know how each of you perhaps maybe maps that to the Mac side.
With regards to my own shop, we do have we do a lot with database analytics. So one of the things we are trying to do is pull more of our data into kind of that single pane of glass. What I would recommend, what I've heard tried at many places is we'll get one tool to manage it all, and that will give us our single pane of glass. I think that is the wrong approach, because what you want to have for your management is the best management tool you can get. And that's regardless of platform. But what you should do is, figure out what people want to have appear in that single pane of glass, and find a tool that pulls in the data via the API or via whatever means are needed, pull into that other kind of central tool to pull into those reports that people are looking for. If someone's just like, I want a website that I can go and take a look at how many Macs and how many PCs I have, go find a tool that lets you pull in from, say, SACM, pull in from Jamf Pro via the API, and consolidate that information for people to look at. That gives you that nice single pane of glass, but meanwhile, it doesn't affect the actual management of the machines. Now, there's going to be some times where people are going to say, well, the tools that are available just don't do what I want. In that case, maybe you're going to have to, find and finance some development of your own to get to it exactly where you need to go.
This might be a bit juvenile, but every time I hear single pane of glass, I think single pain in the ass.
There's a question in the Slack channel that's got a bunch of upvotes right now. Did you guys see that one?
I'm seeing them, but you guys have questions too, so if you want to read it, go for it.
It's for those of us in highly secured environments where APNS is blocked, how did you convince your security team to allow APNS traffic on the network?
Show them what they're losing out on by not having it. If they want the security controls applied, then they're going to need to allow the configuration profiles to do so.
Yeah, I agree with Lisa. I think showing people what they're missing out on. I've been lucky enough to only had to do that once many years ago, and been places afterwards that had already solved this problem. But I would say definitely get the people that are concerned together with your Apple reps and have them sit down and look at how the system actually works and make sure that they understand what it is that is happening, how the communication works with Apple, how it's encrypted and what ports are being used, what you can do to restrict it, and then go forward and see if they still have objections to that. Because I think that when someone just says, hey, open up all your stuff to all of Apple, people are rightly confused and think that might not be the best thing. But when you get down into the details and have a better understanding of it, I think you're going to have a much better conversation with your networking and security teams.
Another consideration is that, yes, you are opening up ports to a large IP range for Apple, but it only needs to be outbound. There doesn't need to be any inbound traffic at all. So one thing you may want to ask your security team is, well, with the way that it is set up, the threat is actually from us, not from Apple. They don't have any inbound access, so we're attacking them if there's any attacker in this scenario. Do you guys see a problem with that? And it may be that they're like, well, we do have some problems with that. Let them lay out those objections, but and then answer them. But one of the things that, when people hear open up to Apple, they sometimes jump to the conclusion that we need to open up inbound access from Apple. And in that scenario, absolutely, that's concerning. But if you tell them we don't need to open up any inbound connections, only outbound, sometimes that changes the conversation completely.
I envy you only having had that discussion once because somebody was a consultant for 10 years. If I had $1 for every time I had that conversation with somebody. The one point that I will always bring up on this is if the DoD is okay with opening APNS ports, you should be as well. But talk to your Apple rep. They know how to have these conversations. They will get the right people involved.
This is probably a controversial statement, but it would be nice if it was a smaller range than the whole of 17 Class A.
Yeah. And have you all noticed that APNS also falls back over 443 now? They've been doing some subtle changes. So Apple is trying to make the process a little smoother. We got a question from the channel?
Yes. Adding to a question about ARM, with all the changes and security measures Apple is implementing, do you think Macs will get to that quote-unquote sandboxed point where Mac administration will become too simplified? We don't run scripts or packages on iOS, for example. Okay, I'll go. I think that as things change, we've all changed with it. The way we managed, Mac OS version 9, and the way we do 10, and even just until the various versions of 10, it's always changing. The technology is always changing, and we're learning new skills. It might seem a little bit scary that a whole language is disappearing from the operating system, but A, you can still reinstall it. And B, take the opportunity to learn something new. Go work with APIs or cloud things. There's lots of different things that you still have the control over on your systems. It's just going to look a little bit different.
I don't think so as well. I think Apple sees the Mac differently than an iOS device. They know that there are people that need to do things with their Macs, and if they lock it down like an iOS device, there's a chance they lose those customers. What they're doing is they're just locking down the system space versus the user space, and making the OS more stable for the users by not having Kext run in the system level and having the system extensions run in the user level. So there's going to be changes, but we've adapted, and I think we'll be okay for a while.
Can I say something real quick? Everybody thinks that Apple's going to unify iOS and macOS. What did they announce at WWDC? iPadOS. We're not going down to a single OS. We're going out. We got watchOS, tvOS. We have 5 now. BridgeOS, if you want to count that separate. But
Apple also made a statement at the past WWDC. I want to say it was in one of the security sessions. It is on one of the videos, so this is public. Apple is not going to prevent users from doing what they want with their Macs. And testament of this is that for every security control Apple puts in, there are ways to turn it off. They might not be convenient ways. They might not be ways that are easy to manage on an enterprise level. But if you want to turn off system integrity protection, boot to recovery, turn it off. You want to turn off TCC, if you boot to recovery and you turn off system integrity protection, that also turns off transparency, consent, and control. If you want to turn off gatekeeper, go into the system preference, turn it off. You see this over and over and over again throughout the operating system, and you don't see this on iOS. The Mac is different because Apple does make it possible for the security controls they put in place for you to just turn that off. Do I recommend it? Absolutely not. But Apple is not taking away your choices in that regards. They are making them hard to do on more than the individual level, and they are working really hard to make sure that a remote attacker can't turn them off. But for an individual Mac user, if you want to turn them off on your own Mac, you absolutely can.
Regarding notarization, what is the best way to utilize this feature, and do you think this will dramatically change how Mac admins deploy software?
We need Tom Bridge up here. If you weren't at Tom Bridge's notarization session yesterday, when it gets posted to YouTube, watch it.
So in my testing so far in Catalina, I've had no issues installing packages from our Jamf Pro server. And my packages at the moment, not all of them are notarized and they've been installed. So I think the notarization really has to do with users going through Safari, downloading an installer, and running it there. If you're pushing packages to your users, hopefully we don't see any of the pop-up saying, do you trust this installer? It's going to be from apps that, when they download, they apply the quarantine flag to the installation.
Less technical question. Where do you look for Mac admin talent?
It's been my experience that folks that have worked for a few years at the Apple Store on the Genius Bar make good prospects. They have the interest. They certainly have the customer service skills. I don't know if anyone's interviewed an Apple Genius recently, but they have really good customer service. It used to be that Apple trained the geniuses more on the technical side. It seems they've gotten away from that now, but people don't wind up on the Genius Bar unless they at least have the interest and the desire to learn. So I would say, if you're looking for talent, try to cultivate some folks at the Apple Genius Bar. See if they want to make that jump from working at the Apple Store to working in the Mac admin space. One of my best hires, who turned out to be, a really great hire, he started at the Genius Bar, moved into the Apple business space at one of the stores, then moved over on his own into an entry-level Mac admin job, picked up a few things, and at that point, that's when he was looking to change jobs, and he came to talk to my shop, which at this point is my old shop. He had the customer service skills nailed. We could develop his technical skills, and by the time that I left that job, he was able to step into my shoes. So I would say look at the Apple Store, because I think that is a great place to find the next generation of Mac admins.
Is somebody going to say Slack? Slack. Jobs board.
Slack.
All right.
This is feedback on an earlier question about higher education institution with a Bookstore reseller that's not DEP enrollment authorized. We initially got the same advice that you got from our Apple rep, which is you're out of luck. I've been told by two people here, one a systems a sales rep for Apple and another a higher ed rep. Work with the reseller to identify the serial numbers, submit those serial numbers to Apple through your sales channel, and they will get them enrolled in DEP, and that is a complete 180 from the advice we were given 6 months ago. We're in the same situation. Our bookstore is not DEP capable, and we've got to backfill.
Thank you.
I got one.
I'll enter here.
Just to add on to that, also University Bookstore whose point of sale system was not, didn't do what Apple was requiring. We were additionally told that obviously the more information we can provide, the easier it is. If you have the Apple order number, the Apple invoices, then that helps to make things more possible, but that it is possible.
Questions?
I have a couple custom 32-bit apps that were written in Apple many years ago, and the developers are either A, moved on, or B, no longer with us. What do I do?
Learn Swift, find a developer that knows Swift. Unfortunately, like, Catalina is not going to support 32-bit apps, so you reach out to the community. There might be someone who has a similar app or can work with you.
Or run Mojave in a VM.
Or that.
Questions?
All right, so in the golden days of Deploy Studio, I would have a particular version of the current OS that I'm deploying. And we won't deploy the versions after that until we're good and ready. And so whenever we had to re-image a machine, we could re-image with that version. Now if we want to re-image, if the machine's usable, we can do start OS install or something, but if this machine is not bootable, we have to boot to recovery and give whatever Apple wants us to have at that point. I know you can do an alternate recovery boot to get the original OS, but then you have to do the original OS and then subsequently update it from there. Is there a good way around that?
I think that's a good use case for Mac Deploy Stick. Yeah, you can use the workflow and pick which OS you want in there. It's like a little imager pop-up. Or you can use Mac Provisioner for EDU.
Mac Deploy Stick I think is going to be an excellent option there. Or Greg Nagel also has a similar tool for reinstalling the OS called Installer. My main advice there is going to be make sure to grab those macOS versions from the App Store while they're available, because once Apple releases a new version, those older versions are gone with the wind. So definitely maintain that archive of the macOS versions that you need. And otherwise, like Amanda says, Mac Deploy Stick. I think that would be a fantastic solution for handling that.
Okay. From the channel, any truth to to hearing that cups is changing in Catalina and PPDs are going away?
I'll take that. So I think this is in reference to the warning that has popped up saying that PPDs are deprecated. This has actually been the case for years. We're just getting a warning about it now. But PPDs have actually been deprecated in cups, I think, for the past 7 years. Now, does that mean that cups has stopped working with PPDs as of 2012? I think the evidence says no. So I think they're just making it official that they're deprecated. so that people are aware, because apparently no one was aware for the past 7 years that they were deprecated, to help prepare folks for the fact that change is coming. We don't yet know what that change is going to be. I suspect it's going to be AirPrint. Personally, I love the idea of driverless printing, but that's what that's about. The fact that this warning is new, but the actual deprecation is not.
And Catalina will still work.
Yeah, still works. Deprecated does not mean busted. It just means it's going away.
Yeah, and
Just not now.
If you, you'll see a lot of different binaries are listed as being deprecated in Catalina, and some of them have been kind of, the writing's been on the wall for a long time, and some of them have even been deprecated before they've just now publicly noted them.
How long has Token D for smart cards been deprecated?
Since 10.7. And it's going away, eventually, maybe.
It's still in Catalina right now.
It's disabled by default, but it's still there. Last year, I think.
All right, what tools, techniques help you stay focused on your task list, gracefully handle interruptions, and feel productive at the end of the day? I like headphones.
Diet Coke? No.
I built a shed outside my house. It has a door that locks. I would be surprised if any of my users can ever find me.
Turning off Slack.
Yeah, similar. If you have a door, if you can shut it, that's great.
Trello boards, or if you have Jira, just keeping stuff in your Kanban page.
Yeah, when it comes to the interruptions was headphones, but when it comes to actually task lists and those sorts of things, I like paper. I know that's weird to sit here and say, but I have a notebook and I write stuff down, and then I can cross it out and feel really happy when I have completed it. And if I turn the page and I haven't completed something, then I go back and I highlight it and I put exclamation points and basically yell at myself for having not done it. And it works for me. Much better than trying to keep it on a computer ever would.
And I have a Jira Kanban board. I like that similar sensation to crossing it off on the paper. Just that way my manager can see what I've done too.
Any other questions out there?
You stole. Oh. Let's go for this one.
I work for a small community college where they always tell us we don't run on the cutting edge of anything, which you can tell by the age of our 8 to 10-year-old Macs that we have all over the place, and our Xserve running 10.6.8 to authenticate some of those machines. How do you get your administration to pull their head out of the sand and realize, yes, it's time to move on, and especially now with Catalina coming out, it looks like we're also going to lose our managed print interface on our Macs.
So,
How do you get management to buy in?
yeah. What kind of life cycles do you guys have on your Apple hardware? Maybe try to.
Yeah, we do 4-year life cycles, and then we kind of use 4th year going into 5th year machines as spares. We're kind of, I guess we're fortunate that our management has already bought in that if you want to have a good experience, you might need to have a life cycle and stick to it. So I can't really help you, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, so for at least the software point, OS, we're N-1. So once 10.15 hits production, 10.13 will no longer be supported. And that's because Apple, if you want the most secure operating system, you want 10.15. So you may want to say to your management, we're missing out on these security features by having a 10.6.8 Xserve in our racks.
And of course, part of this is financial.
Well, yeah, of course.
I guess it really depends on the incentives that your management has. If the incentive is basically, I want to save money, and security takes a backseat to the financial considerations, that's a tough place to be. In my case, I work for a company that does cutting edge software development. So we have to have the newest tools. We have to have the newest stuff. Our life cycle is 3 years, and we support the shipping OS. Whatever the shipping OS is, that's what we're supporting. So we don't even support N-1. So once Catalina comes out, that's what we're going to be supporting. There's going to be a transition time to get folks off of Mojave and onto Catalina, but there's going to be a point where we're just going to be like, we're not supporting Mojave anymore. It's only Catalina. If you can get your organization to that point, a lot of this follows. But the thing is, you have to have that honest conversation with management on what is actually the top priority. If it's, we want amazing return on investment by continuing to run things until they break, and that's our priority, then that's the priority. If it is, we want a safe and secure computing environment, then they're going to have to spend some money and be more rapidly iterative on how they are supporting their computing environment. And it's going to cost some more money. So they got to decide that.
Yes, this will be recorded.
Yes,
So
this is being recorded.
This will be on YouTube, and I can play this for them. I've been in a situation with an organization that was having financial difficulties, and even then I was able to still convince them that a 5-year life cycle, number one, for equipment was about the longest out we could go, and number two, there was business continuity. So what happens if that 1068 X server of yours dies? So, that, I think that's the approach you said. Like, we have a single point of failure here. This is a machine that is far beyond, it's probably at least 9 years old. It's far beyond its life cycle, and it's a single point of failure, and we need to replace this. And I know that money is tight, but if this goes, which it will, I'm still thinking of when I was a consultant, of the customer that ran their mail server on a Communicate Pro on an Xserve G5, and it died in 2014 when I was at JNUC, and they wanted me to come and fix it.
Names for the past.
And their backups were corrupt too. Yeah, so that's the kind of scenario you want to avoid.
I just wanted to comment to his, I know our university has looked at converting a lot of that old computer space just to free open space, because a lot of kids have their own devices now. You could look at maybe slowing down your footprint, and then maybe trying to encourage you to buy newer machines and give them the aspect of, we don't need 5,000 machines anymore, we can get away with 2,500 machines and have some common space for kids to work with their own laptops or devices.
So the comment was, just for the recording, that another organization with similar challenges has gone to more shared use machines and BYOD as a way to potentially reduce that financial cost to support.
Another factor to consider is that the longer you wait to convert legacy systems, the fewer vendors are going to be able to do that, and the less leverage that your purchasing folks are going to have when it comes to negotiating how much they want to pay to get those services migrated to newer services. I ran into this once upon a time with, there was a solution called Meeting Maker for calendaring. How many folks ran across Meeting Maker? Oh yeah. Meeting Maker really didn't want to go into other systems. So when the time came for my shop to convert Meeting Maker to Exchange, there was precisely one vendor, that did this. You can imagine how much leverage we had with regards to negotiating how much this was going to cost.
Okay, I have one that someone's been waiting patiently in the channel. Now that Apple has deprecated inclusion of most or all scripting libraries going forward, what is the future of scripting in macOS now that Mac admins will need to seek separate security allowances to get those libraries?
ZSH. I guess what we've seen in some of the sessions this week, but we have to keep looking at the betas and try to keep up with the changes as they're happening. Alan, looks like you've got something better to add.
I have all the mics. No, I mean, you can still, no, I'm good. No, I'm good, thanks. You can still package your own and keep them up to date. We do that with applications. You're going to have to do that with your scripting languages. But they're still there and they're still usable. And like we've been saying, it's just have to adapt.
I don't think scripting is going away in OS 10. It's just not going to be included by default. We've seen the same approach taken with Java, with things like exports. You know, right now in Catalina, I believe that it's just Python 3 that you can install via, via the Xcode select type approach. At some point in time, Ruby and Perl might get that same way once Apple removes their frameworks that they're actually using Ruby and Perl for out of the OS or refactors them. I will put a plug in once again for Armin Griebel's Scripting OS 10 website, scriptingosx.com. He has a primer on migrating to ZSH or ZSH. But yeah, and again, as far as getting security approval, we're actually going from an environment where we've got Python 2 on a machine that hasn't been patched in a long time to where it'll go away at some point. So the security posture is actually getting better by having these languages removed. Yeah. And again, if you think about it, does your dad need to have Python on his Mac? That's another attack surface, another attack vector. Unless he's writing code in Python or you're coding Python for him.
Yeah, Robert took some of my words, but I don't know about you. I've never used the system Python for any Python stuff that I've worked on. I always install my own, so I don't see this making a big impact in what I'm doing. If I've already had to install a different version, okay, so I don't really care what was already there or if nothing was already there. I'm going to be installing the version that I want to use, not the version that the system wants to use anyway.
And if you're like yours truly with a stash of old Perl scripts you've been using for years, the summer is a great time to convert those to ZSH, and Apple have kindly given us a buffer zone and a warning to install Perl manually when the time comes that they're not going to reinstall it. So appreciate the warning, Apple. Thank you.
Okay.
One thing that is also perhaps being overlooked is that folks may not be aware that Swift does have its own shebang line. So one approach to moving forward with scripting may be to learn Swift scripting, because that runtime is going to be there. It'll have its own shebang, and I don't think Apple's going to be running away from Swift anytime soon.
Questions?
I can't throw it that far.
Dennis, can you hit Dennis?
Somebody look up from this middle section.
Watch water bottles and laptop screens.
This is more of a question about user experience, and as it kind of dovetails into deployment. Do you have users who've given you any pushback about zero-touch machines that have arrived on their desk where they get to log in and pick a network and then wait a period of time until their machine is ready, compared to previously if I'll pick a name, technology team has provisioned that machine in advance and then supplied it to them?
I haven't personally gotten any feedback like that. And the people that I've worked with that are using it, most people kind of think it's cool. We have a little setup where we have splash screens and we provide information. There might also be Space Invaders involved from one of my UK colleagues. And so we try and give the users a little bit of information and also something to entertain them for a few minutes. But again, like I mentioned before, I also try and limit the amount of time that they are stuck sitting right there with it. I can think of snarky answers if somebody were to complain, which I obviously wouldn't say out loud. But I think that, I mean, if anyone were to complain, I think if you just simply explain what is happening, that they should accept it. Yeah.
We actually, we have a custom-built setup app for our team that actually handles this scenario in the following way. So our setup process involves going through Apple's setup assistant, and then as part of DEP, it pushes our setup application to the machine. And the setup application, when it launches, the first thing it'll do is it'll set up like the system level stuff. Like it'll set up the system level configuration, it'll install the software, and then once all that is finished, it will either shut down automatically after a certain period of time, or it'll give you the option to restart. And the reason for that is that after the restart, it goes into the user level setup. So the automatic shutdown is for our imaging techs so that they can kick it off, and then when they come back and the screen is black, they know they can put it in the box and ship it to wherever it needs to go. On next startup, our setup app will launch again and guide the user through the user setup process, which only takes a few minutes. So that's how we're accommodating for that. Meanwhile, it's still a process that our users can run by themselves. So if they ever need to reprovision their machine, they can follow that exact same process. And they'll just hit the restart button instead of waiting for it to shut down.
Do you see PowerNap ever gonna be like API'd or so, opened up, closing lid problems, you know, these type of things for backup software which needs to run in the background? Yeah, user close the lid all the time. Only Time Machine seems to be doing that. Yeah.
So how many people have the problem of with Jamf, for example, pushing updates out and user, closes the lid in the middle of the package download or something like that? I mean, Amanda, do you have any issues with that in the school environment?
Yes.
So it's a common,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it would be great. I don't know what Apple's plans are for that.
sounds like there could be some improvement, to both the OS level and some of the management tools to better handle it. I know that if you're using HTTPS distribution points in Jamf, in theory, that package will re-download, but I've seen cases where it doesn't.
Another option may be, instead of running the software updates yourselves, to enable Apple's own built-in options for enabling macOS updates, because then that's fully aware of PowerNap and how it works, and you shouldn't have to worry about it causing you problems, because the updates will run in their own time and not interfere with PowerNap.
Do we have anything in the channel?
No.
Because we have like time for one more. Go ahead.
No, we're good. We have time for one more.
We have time for one more question. All right.
This is probably a simple one, but is it possible to get user-approved MDM without having your system with DEP or Apple Business or Apple School Manager? Yes. Yes. The user just has to click the button.
Yeah, I can prove that because most of my machines are not in Apple Business Manager, and that's exactly how they're enrolled, as user-approved MDM. Okay.
So before we wrap up, I just wanted to mention that we mentioned a couple of blogs and tools up here, and some kind people have posted links to them in the Slack channel for this room. So if you want to know what any of those are, take a look in there. And thank you to the people who did that for us.
Yep. Thank you for coming.